welcome to Accelerate Your App Development with Aurelia. My name is Jedd Ahyoung. I am an Aurelia contributor and I work in Tallahassee currently. I make a living with C#, JavaScript. I've done some PHP, I've done some server administration. Basically, I kind of spend my career trying to convince people that I'm awesome. And a lot of people kind of see through that, but occasionally, very occasionally, I get lucky. So today, I want to talk to you about accelerating your application development with Aurelia. And I'd also like to talk about what speed is. Speed, I like to define it in 3 parts, right? So the first part is important. First part is getting started quickly. If you have a tool that can help you get started and build something quickly and easily, then you're good to go. But it's not just that. It's not just about building something quickly. It's about learning how to build something quickly. It's about the learning curve. So that's the first part of speed. The second part of speed is that you want to gain momentum. Once you get proficient with a tool, you want your tool to really be able to support you and let you do really cool things, right? So you want your tool to give you a competitive edge. You want it to help you get ahead. And then finally, one of the most important parts of this is not stopping. So if you've got a good head of speed and you're going and you get stopped because your tool for some reason gets in your way, or you're trying to do something that it's not designed to do and you just can't do it, then you get stopped and that kills your speed, right? So those are the 3 major parts of speed. And so today I'd like to talk to you about a tool that I think has helped me accelerate my application development and gain speed. It's called Aurelia. So I'll be honest, it's early, right? It's 8, we're all here. So we have an agenda for this morning. It's 4 parts, and once we got through that, we're good to go. So first part of the agenda, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what Aurelia is. We're gonna go through some facts, a little bit of background, we'll figure out like what we're talking about, right? Just to get an idea of what is this talk really about. Then we're gonna get off the line. We're gonna build a starter application, just something small, nothing crazy, but we're just gonna see kind of what we can do with the framework. So that'll be the getting started portion. Then we're gonna gain momentum. We're gonna see how Aurelia's tools can help us to become proficient and start to build our applications faster. And that's gonna be pretty cool, I think. But finally, we're gonna talk about not stopping. Aurelia, we're gonna talk about its flexibility and its extensibility so that whenever you hit a situation that isn't really ideal, Aurelia will hopefully help you get around that due to its design. All right, so that's our agenda. We know what we're gonna do. Let's get started. So, what is Aurelia? I guess any of you guys out there, have you guys heard of it? I think you said you heard of it, was it yesterday? Yeah, okay. Yeah, had you heard of it before that at all?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I was surprised myself after I was looking into it.
It's like, all right, yeah. I hear that. Has anyone here heard of Durandal.js by any chance? No, okay. Here's one. Has anyone out here heard of Angular? Yeah, show of hands, everybody, right? Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about Aurelia. At its core, Aurelia is just a client-side framework that's written in JavaScript. It's designed for web and mobile, but it can also be run on desktop through Electron. Aurelia is not monolithic. It's a collection of libraries, right? And so these libraries adhere to common interfaces and API standards, and so they work together as a whole. The nice thing about that is that if you want to, you can use all of it. Aurelia is great. If you only want to use part of it, you only have to use part of it. You only need to pull what you need. Aurelia provides single-page application functionality, and we call these SPAs. So instead of a collection of individual web pages, scripts and hypertext, you basically end up with something that's more akin to a full client-side application that happens to run in your browser. It's all running in JavaScript. But because it is a full client-side application, that means that it doesn't just have to run in the browser. You can run it on mobile. You can run it on desktop through Electron. Someone gave an Electron talk, I think it was Saturday. It was amazing. And so, yeah, you can do a lot with this just because of the single page application space. Aurelia leverages the modern DOM and web components technology. Essentially, Aurelia is standards compliant, which is important. There are frameworks that do not adhere to web standards internally and externally. And it's not to say that they're bad frameworks, but sometimes you don't know where they'll stand or how they'll help you because they're not standards compliant. Aurelia is standards compliant. And so that makes it simpler, easier, and more extensible to work with. Aurelia has a specific philosophy, and I like to say that Aurelia is made by real-world developers for real-world developers. So to that end, it's open source. It's licensed under the MIT license. I think we all heard about a fiasco with a patents file for a specific framework, maybe, possibly not. Okay, possibly not, I don't know. But that's never gonna happen with Aurelia. We are open source now. We will always be open source. We will always be MIT. Aurelia, inside the framework, it strives for clean code and simple conventions. And what that means is that in your applications, because Aurelia is clean on the inside and simple, you can strive for clean code and simple conventions in your applications. We just try to make it easy for you to do what you gotta do. You know, that's nice. I think that's nice. We use modern tooling, so we are based on the JavaScript ecosystem. And if you know anything about that, that has really kind of exploded over the past 5 years. So we're using modern tools. We're using NPM, the Node Package Manager. We're using Node. We're using build tools like Gulp. We're using transpilers like Babel and TypeScript. You know, we're up to date on all of that stuff. And as Aurelia continues, it will continue to use that modern technology, so it never falls behind. So you can always be sure that Aurelia will be up to speed on what you need to do. And finally, what I like to call the ilities. Inside the framework, we strive for testability, maintainability, and extensibility, and some other ilities as well. And so what that means is that we help you strive for the same things: testability, maintainability, extensibility in your applications. And finally, we have rapid adoption by some Fortune 500 companies. It's actually pretty cool, and we have a great community. We have one of the largest Gitter channels out there, and we have great Stack Overflow presence. And you know, it's a good community. It's very active, so you're never going to be left out in the cold. So yeah. All right, so I've just told you a lot about what Aurelia is. I've given you a lot of facts, a lot of background. That's cool, right? But we're developers, and if you're anything like me, you're probably thinking like, what? I mean, what did you just say to me? You just told me like a lot of stuff. You know, I don't know, how can that help me? What does that mean? And that's a good question, so let's find out. Let's take a step forward, and let's accelerate our application development. So we talked about speed, how we can define it in 3 parts. This is the first part. Question is, how can Aurelia accelerate your application development and make it easier to get started? So let's take our first step, the first part of speed, and let's find out by building a starter application. So as you can see, this is kind of just a general idea of what we're going to build. We're going to build a quick little Code on the Beach registration page because we're at Code on the Beach, and Code on the Beach is awesome. We're going to keep a track of who's attended, and we're going to have like some really simple navigation thrown in there just for good measure. So yeah, again, basic page. That's what we're going to do. We're going to create our starter app with a basic page. Some simple templating behavior in Aurelia is going to allow us to do what we have here. And then we're going to set up client-side routing so that we have our navigation portion, working and bound. So let's take a look at a demo. All right, so I want to make sure that you guys can see all of this. I'm going to say a little quick disclaimer right now. I would love to live code for you guys, and I think that would be awesome, but I have really fat fingers, and I type quickly, but it's mostly the backspace key. So instead of doing that and just like embarrassing myself for you guys, I've opted to use Git tags. So I won't be doing any live coding, but we're gonna step through the code that we've written, and we're gonna kind of go like version by version and see what we're gonna do. So this first part for getting started, we have 3 versions. So I'm going to go ahead and do a get checkout. Well, I'll show you actually. I've got tags, get tag. So as you can see, if you can see that, I've got 5 tags. We're going to go ahead and check out the first one. So get checkout, get checkout, v0.1. All right. And I'm also going to go ahead and start our development server just because we'll do that now. We'll get that out of the way. All right. And yeah. So let's take a look at our code to accomplish, the page that we talked about. So this is an Aurelia application. Is this big enough for you guys? Can you read this? Okay, good. If you've ever done web development before, we're basically looking at what is just a web page, right? It's pretty simple. We have an index file, and then we have like a source directory that has our JavaScript, and then we've got a styles directory that has some CSS in it, and we've just got some extra stuff in the root directory that, like we have a favicon, we have another JavaScript file. So it's all pretty straightforward. And so if we take a look at index, our index.html file is pretty straightforward as well, right? I mean, we've got our HTML, we've got our head tags, title, links to style sheets, meta. There's really not that much going on here, but I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of lines that are important for what we're doing. First of all, I'm going to talk about line 16. We're actually loading a script called JSPM packages /system.js. I'd like to say now that not all of your applications when you build will necessarily use this, but all this is a module loader. If you've ever used anything in JavaScript like require.js, if you're familiar with that, it's very similar to that. It just, it loads your modules. That's what it does. So in this case, we're using system, which is it's a spec that lets you load modules for ES6, and it's actually pretty cool. So that's what we're using here. The line below, line 17, we have config.js. And because we're using the system loader, config.js actually is generated by something called the JavaScript package manager. We talked about modern tooling. JSPM will install your client-side dependencies. So if you've ever used anything like, I think, Bower or anything like that, it's kind of like that except a lot nicer. So what it will do is generate, I'm going to take a look at this config.js here. It's going to generate a file that looks like this. And there's a lot of stuff here. But essentially, this is just module mappings. It just tells system, hey, load this and call it this. So when we load a module, we know it's here. And again, if you've used anything like require.js, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of cruft, but that's all that is. It's just a module mapping. All right. So 16 and 17, we're just loading all our modules in. That's how we load Aurelia. That's how we load our external scripts, everything. And then on line 19, we call system.import Aurelia bootstrapper. That's all we need to do, and Aurelia will start. So right when you import this bootstrapper, it knows what to do because Aurelia uses conventions. So what does it do? On line 10, we see that we have this Aurelia app, right? This Aurelia app attribute, and it's pointing towards main. What the bootstrapper on line 19 does, it looks for this Aurelia app attribute. It looks anywhere in the DOM and says, okay, if that's there, then I'm going to take the argument here and look for that JavaScript file. So when we bootstrap, all we have to do is put this Aurelia app on our body and point it towards a file. In this case, it's main, so we're going to load main.js. And the bootstrapper knows exactly what we're going to do. It's conventions-based. It's simple. So let's take a look at main.js. Now, on line 1, you see that we've got an import statement. And actually, I guess before I continue, does this look like JavaScript to you guys, or does it look a little odd? Is this JavaScript that you used to? Import, export?
Looks a little odd.
Okay. Looks a little odd. This is what's called ES6. Well, actually, ES 2016 and 2017. It's the new ECMAScript standard. And so it is just JavaScript. You'll see some different keywords. If you're familiar with C# or any class-based languages, you'll see some classes in here. So it should look pretty familiar. But basically, in here, we're just importing a module, Bootstrap. We're importing the JavaScript. It's what does that. And then on line 3, we actually export one function from our module, and it's called configure. So when we bootstrap the application, Aurelia actually looks for this function. It looks for this function to be exported, and it runs it. It just says, okay, if there's a configure function, I'm going to run it, and I'm going to pass an argument, which is going to be my Aurelia instance. And then in here, that allows me as a developer to, okay, I'm going to configure my Aurelia instance. So I'm going to use standard configuration, I'm going to use development logging, and here I can, load any features, plugins, or resources that I want. And we do it. But the important part is line 17, The important part is line 12 here. So we call Aurelia.start, which initializes the Aurelia instance that we're using. But then we call Aurelia.setRoot. And this is actually what's responsible for displaying the view model that we're going to see. So this is always here. It takes an argument, and it will, whatever the argument is, it's just a name, it will load that view model. So if I give this an argument of Jedd, like my name, it would look for Jedd.js and maybe Jedd.html. If I gave it an argument of app, it would look for app. If I don't give it an argument, by convention, it will look for app.js and app.html. So all I have to do is just call setRoot, and Aurelia will know automatically to look for a view model called app. So let's take a look at app.js. So this is an example of a view model, and as I said before, Aurelia will look for a view. But you'll notice that we didn't have to really register, this is a view model, we didn't have to really register this view model anywhere. Aurelia knows that app.html and app.js, they're named the same and they're in the same directory. It knows how to find them. It's a convention. It can be overridden, but when you're getting started, just drop your views and view models with the same name, same file name, not the extension, of course, same file name in the same directory. Aurelia knows how to find them. So you don't have to write a lot of framework code. And actually, when we look at this view model here, we notice that we have an export class, welcome, and we've got a few properties, right? Some class properties. We have a heading, we have a first name, we have a last name. And then on line 6, we have a getter function, full name, that returns the combination of first name and last name. Pretty simple, right? Finally, for the submit function, we have something that says alert, welcome to Code on the Beach. So when we register, that works. Now, one thing you might notice, or actually, I guess maybe one thing you might not notice, I have to say, is that when you look at this, all we have here is a class with some properties and some methods, right? For me, I'm thinking, okay, well, where's the framework stuff? There is none. You don't have to put it there. I don't have an export class welcome extends Aurelia.component or Aurelia.viewModel, but I also don't have to say Aurelia.useViewModel welcome. This is essentially just a plain old JavaScript object, and it works as my view model. So it helps you get started quickly. So I've got this, and it's just going to work. I don't have to do anything crazy with the framework. And like I said before, we have standards, conventions that say, okay, well, if I've got a view model called app.js, I'm going to pair it with a view called app.html. And so this is our view. It's just HTML. There's really not much here to be super excited about, which is good because this is familiar to anyone who's done some web development. There are only a couple things that really stand out here. On line 1, we have a template tag. And that's actually a tag that Aurelia uses. It's part of the web component spec. And it's really just used to define what is called an HTML fragment. So instead of having like an HTML, a head, a full page, this is just a fragment of HTML. So every Aurelia view anywhere that's used is always going to have the template tag as its root. But it's just a tag, right? So let's keep looking here. What else have we got that's odd? Let's look at line 5. We have an h2 tag, but then here we have this kind of curly brace syntax with a $sign in front of it. What's that? Well, that is what we call string interpolation binding. In app.js, you notice that we had this heading property on line 2, right? Code on the Beach registration. When we use this interpolation, that instead of, when Aurelia sees this in the template, it's going to replace that expression inside those braces with what's in my view model or whatever the expression evaluates to. And this $ brace syntax is actually based in the ES6 template string syntax. So if you're familiar with JavaScript ES6 at all, then this will look familiar to you. And the more you use the framework, the more that this will be pretty common. Now let's take a look at line 9. This is just a regular input, right? Nothing special going on. We have a type, we have a class, we have an ID, and we have a placeholder. But we have this value.bind first name. And so we know what a value property is on an input. It's just the value of the input, what's going to go in there. But we have this .bind statement. And we have an expression here that happens to be our first name. This is also pretty simple. All it does is it binds the value, the expression, and the expression in this case is the first name property that we have on our view model, which is John. So it just binds that property to my input value. And in this case, because it's an input, Aurelia will do two-way binding. We've heard a lot about two-way binding and how it's not that performant. Aurelia has some ways to make it performant. There's no dirty checking involved. It's very fast. Now, one thing that I can do, if I really want to, I can opt out of two-way binding. I can say, right now I can say two-way, right, and I get two-way. Or I can do one-way and get one-way if I want to. But if I use bind, Aurelia knows what to do. If I were to bind to something that's not like an input, like a form tag, Aurelia will say, okay, I'm going to use one-way binding because it makes sense. So we've got that on line 9 and 13. So that's all that does. And then finally, if we look at the form on line 6, we've got a submit button on line 19 down here, right? So when you click submit, it submits a form. And so we have a delegate here. We say submit.delegate, and then we call our submit function that's in our view model. Delegate is essentially just a declarative way to subscribe to an event. And it's actually pretty nice because I don't have to write an event handler in my view model. I don't have to say, okay, well, I want to subscribe to a form. It's all here. It's declarative. I say submit.delegate or any other event that I want, right? And there's another way to do this. You can use trigger. I'm not going to talk that much about that. For all extents and purposes, it does the same thing. The output is the same. The internals are a little different, but the output is the same. So yeah. So when we look at this, we've got 3 files. We've got our template. We've got a little bit going on here. We've got an application, an app.js, which is our view model, and then our main and our index. So let's see what that looks like when we run it. Well, when we load it. There we go. All right, so this is our application. We've got code on the beach registration, right? This is what we saw before. And so when I type my name in here, I get Jedd, right? Oh, it changed, Jedd Doe. That's because of the binding that Aurelia is doing. If I use my last name, I say Ahyoung, right? And you'll see that full name is automatically getting called, because it's binding. It's doing the two-way binding. So I click submit, I get my alert. It says, welcome to Code on the Beach, Jedd Ahyoung. Why, thank you, registration application. You were so awesome, appreciate it. And that's, part 1, right? So we've already created a form pretty quickly. So let's take a look at what else we can do. We talked about repeating and we talked about keeping track of what we're doing, right? So let's check out v0.2. Whoops, v0.2. All right. All right. So maybe we want to keep track of who's registered, right, for Code on the Beach. So we really don't have that many changes here. We've already established our index. Nothing's changed here. We've already established our main. Nothing's changed here. So the main differences are in the view and view model pair. So if we look at app.js, we just add a new property called attendees, right? And it's just an array. It's just a collection. And we have a change in our submit function. When we submit, we're going to push the full name of the attendee onto our attendees collection. And then, on 15 and 16 here, we just reset it. Look at that. So then in app.html, we use a little bit of what we call templating behavior. This is an included templating behavior that Aurelia has internally in the framework. You'll notice that we have a little bit down here, 22 through 26. On line 25, we have a list, but we're using a repeat.for, attendee of attendees. Now what this does, as you can guess, it does what it says on the tin, right? It repeats for, every item that's in the attendee's collection. And it has an of keyword instead of in because of the JavaScript for of syntax. So again, if you're familiar with ES6, the templating should be fairly familiar to you. And there's really not that much going on. We just, to look at this. So we add, I guess, a couple of lines for templating, and I'm actually missing a section tag. And then, we add a collection property and change our submit function, and we get this functionality here. So if I, add my name again, Jedd Ahyoung, hit submit. Welcome to Code on the Beach, Jedd Ahyoung. Well, thank you. All right, so I'm in attendance. What's your name? Nathan. What's your last name? Hart. Is that with a no E? No E. Okay, Nathan Hart. Nathan Hart, welcome to Code on the Beach, Nathan, and you're in attendance. So, we can just do that, and that's simple. We can just create something, and it's a simple application, of course, but we haven't written that many lines of code. We've got something working. But what if I wanted to add routing to my application? Usually when you add client-side routing, your code kind of explodes, and for good reason. Like, you gotta set up client-side routing, which is usually kind of a big thing, and I understand that. So let's check out what that might look like. All right. Okay. So first, we notice that we have a welcome view model, but these are actually our app view models. There's nothing really different here. So if we look at app.js and app.html, what's different is that now we export a class called app, and we have something called configure router in here. But you'll notice that we're still not importing anything like an Aurelia router or anything like that. All we do is declare this function, and then we configure our router. We give it a title, and we give it one route, right? And then we just set it. We set it to a property in our view model so that we can use it in our view, and we'll take a look at that later. Now, we also have a file called navbar.html that I'd like to show you guys. If we look at this, this is just a Bootstrap navigation bar. So if you've used Bootstrap, this should look pretty familiar. There's not really that much going on here. We have some templating behaviors. We have a repeat.for that we've seen. We have an if.bind, which is also another templating behavior. If the expression evaluates to true, then what's inside of this tag will be displayed in the DOM. If it's not there, if it doesn't evaluate it, it'll get removed. But what's interesting is that we have, we have this property, router that is navigating, and we have another one for repeat.for row of router navigation on line 18. Where is this router property coming from? Because I don't have a view model called navbar.js, right? Like, if I look at that, I'm thinking, well, that's got to come from somewhere. Well, it does. On line 1, we have a bindable property, and what this essentially means is that we'll see how this is used later, but it means that when I use this property, this router, I can use this router inside my template if I pass it in, and I'll show you how that bindable works in just a second. So we've taken a look at app.js, and we've taken a look at line 8 where we say this.router equals router. We let it be available on our view. So if I go to app.html, now we see some stuff happening here. We have a require tag. That's actually something that Aurelia uses. It's an Aurelia specific tag, and if I have a view, it just tells Aurelia, look, I need these resources for this view. So I'm actually requiring from navbar.html. And the reason that I'm doing that is because if you notice on line 5, I have a custom element called navbar. That's not an HTML element, right? Like, it's not something that's in the HTML spec, but it's my custom element. And then I have this router.bind equals router. So that bindable keyword that I talked about before on the template tag, that actually just allows me to get to bind to this attribute. I can say router.bind and pass in a property. If I had a bindable that said my name, like bindable Jedd, I'd be able to say navbar, and then I'd have an attribute called Jedd, and I could say bind, and then I could use that property within my view. So that's pretty cool. We have a custom element that provides our navigation. We haven't had to write any JavaScript to use it, and we'll see it working. And then on line 8, we have a router view, which is actually just an Aurelia custom element that's provided to work alongside the router. It's a templating resource. So let's see what we have now. So if I scroll over, now I've got a nice little nav bar, Aurelia, welcome, right? And this is actually, the nav bar is connected to my router because it's bound that way. So when I add a route to my router, it's going to automatically show up in the nav bar and it's just going to work. I didn't have to write any JavaScript to really get this working. I had to pull in a router, but not that much. And so like now we have our full application that we were talking about before. So let's get back to the presentation here. All right, so what did we see? Well, we saw that Aurelia prefers convention over configuration. I was able to bootstrap the app by convention. I was able to, create a view and a view model pair because they live next to each other. I don't have to register them or extend any Aurelia framework components. It's configurable, but it works by default. We saw a streamline view model syntax. It's simple because it's just JavaScript. You only have to use as much of the framework as you want. We didn't have to pull anything in. It was just a plain old JavaScript object. The navbar didn't even need a backing view model. We actually just created a full HTML page without having to create any JavaScript to back it. If that's not streamlined, I don't know what is. We saw the simple binding system. We have property dot bind syntax, or property dot delegate. It makes sense and it's simple to use. So once you take a look at it, it's easy to reason about what you're doing. And it's named well as well. Finally, we saw an example of the lifecycle method. I didn't have to import a router. I didn't have to say, hey, Aurelia, I want to configure this. I put a function in a method inside one of my classes, and Aurelia knew, it's like, all right, if I see something called configure router, I'm going to call this, and I'm going to help you configure your router. So, we got started pretty quickly, and we, built something that is small, but, we built it quickly. Aurelia provides these starter projects on its website and on its GitHub. So if you want to get started, all you have to do is pull one and just start messing around with it. It helps you get started quickly. All right, so again, the agenda. We've gone through what Aurelia is, and we've gotten started. So let's go ahead and move forward. Let's gain some momentum. Let's check out what Aurelia can do for us using custom components by building it on its custom elements and custom attributes. So again, we're going to come back to our application here. And what I'm going to do is create another page, alongside our page that we have here. I'm going to create a tree hierarchy. And we can use it for anything. We can use it for taxonomy. We can use it for, tasks. We can use it for, Pokemon, right? Like water, fire, we can just categorize them that way. I don't play Pokemon. Maybe you guys do. My phone won't really, it'll just die. Anyway. So yeah, we're going to create an Aurelia custom element to do this. Custom elements are appropriate for small compositional elements. So they're based on views and view models, but they can be reused inside your views and view models anywhere. And so if I want to create something that I want to reuse, a custom element's great for that. So again, we're going to create a custom component. We're going to create a hierarchy based on a component that's recursive, because I don't want to write a full tree view. I just want to write it once and use it. Then we're going to create a custom attribute. Custom attributes in Aurelia are really appropriate for cross-cutting concerns. If I have an element, I can use it in multiple places, but maybe I want to do something like, make an element draggable or make a component draggable, and maybe I want to do that everywhere. Do I want to write that for each component? Not necessarily, but with a cross-cutting concern, I can write it once and use it multiple times. So in this case, we're going to integrate a third-party library called Snapped. It's just a small animation library, very thin, very streamlined, very efficient actually, and we're just going to see what we can do with a custom element. So let's go back to our demo, and let's check out 0.4. 0.4. All right. So. Let's take a look at what has changed here. So first of all, we look at our source tree, and you'll notice that, again, there are a couple of new files, right? Like we've got something called component demo, we've got component demo.js, we've got recursive component.html and recursive component.js, right? but welcome hasn't changed. App has changed just because we've added on line 6, we've added a new route, and that will automatically, we don't really have to play with the nav bar anymore. We just add a route and it works. I'm not gonna have to touch my nav bar ever again, which is really, really nice. So let's take a look at component demo. Let's take a look at the template first, the HTML. Okay, so this should look pretty familiar because of what we just went through with the getting started. So we have our template tag, it's just a HTML fragment. And then we have a require from recursive component. We tell Aurelia, hey, I need you to use this resource if you're gonna load this view. And so it requires from /recursive component, and it knows how to find it in the source tree, in the hierarchy. Then we have a section, we have our H2, and then on line 6, we actually use our recursive component. And that's really all we have to do for our view. Now, if we look at component demo.js, it's actually so simple that we don't really even need anything in there because we're not doing anything of consequence. So, you know, it's arguable whether you even need that or not. But for now, it's empty. We're not going to really pay that much attention to it. But let's take a look at recursive component.js. Let's take a look at the backing view model because we're creating a custom element. Now, we did this before with the nav bar. We didn't really have any JavaScript that we had to write. In this case, we're gonna write some JavaScript because we want some functionality that, you know, it's easier to expose through a view model, right? And on line 1, you see that we're importing bindable and computed from Aurelia framework. This is the first time where we're actually importing something specific from the framework, right? So, you know, we've gotten started without having to do this. We've come this far without, you know, getting to this point. So now we're gonna import these things. And sometimes, again, you don't need to, but in this case, I want to. So I'm gonna import bindable, and I'm gonna import computed from Aurelia framework. Those are 2 Aurelia components. And then I'm gonna export my class called recursive component custom element. This is another nice little convention that Aurelia has. If I call something custom element, it's gonna know that it's a custom element. If I call something custom attribute, Aurelia is gonna know that it's a custom attribute. I don't have to register it. I don't have to tell Aurelia, hey, you know, like, can you use this? Or do I have to extend from Aurelia custom attribute? You know, just name it. It knows what to do. It's quick. You know, it's nice to work with. And then, so on line 4, we have a bindable here. And we talked about what the template bindable does, right? Like you can pass in a property. This is actually the exact same thing. It's just on the view model side instead of in the view. So when I use this, I can have a parent attribute and I can bind the property to that. We have a name and then we have children. And then we have get full name on line 9, and it just returns a combination of the parent name and the parent that we're bound to, right? And finally, add child, we just push an empty object onto children so that we know that something's there. So this is pretty simple. Lines 8, computed from, I'm not gonna go deep into this, but we talked, well, I mentioned dirty checking because we talked about two-way binding in Aurelia, right? Dirty checking, Aurelia does use it if it has to, but only as a last resort because, you know, it has overhead and it's slow. In this case, because we're using a get function, Aurelia would generally have to default to dirty checking for this property because it's a function. It's not going to know whether it changes, so it has to keep checking it. This computed from decorator here just tells it, hey, this is actually dependent on parent and name, so only change full name when parent and name change. And it just gets rid of dirty checking. So if we have time, I can maybe show you the difference between performance if I take this out and not. But I just wanted to mention that. It's not a big deal, but I just wanted to mention it. So if we take a look at the view for this, the HTML, this bindable actually doesn't need to be here because we're using it in our view model, so we can actually take that out. You'll see that on line 2, we're actually calling our parent, and this string interpolation binding here, you'll notice that it's actually an expression. It's not just a property. You can put expressions in here, which is really cool because it makes it really powerful. On line 7, we're binding to name, so we have an input. We've seen that before. And then on line 10, we actually have a click.delegate add child for this button. So that just adds our child on the click event of the button. I mean, that's We've seen that before. Now, here's where something cool happens. On line 14, we're using this recursive component inside of itself, right? So, and then we have this parent.bind. So we know that we have a bindable property called parent. I can use it here. And what I'm gonna do is bind to the value of the full name of this element here. So recursively, when I change the full name, it'll bind to its child. And we'll see what that looks like when we run it. And finally, we have this repeat.for child of children. So the collections that I have, we're gonna run, and it works. So let's see what that actually looks like in practice. All right. So again, we've got this, we've seen this. This is just the usual, like, welcome, thank you. Yeah, I'm done with that. But let's look at our component demo. So I have a recursive component. So let's say that I have something like, trying to think, let's do life, right? Let's add a child. And then let's do, I'm trying to think, let's do animal. And then let's do plant. All right, so what's an example of an animal? Give me anything you got. Animal. A what? Tiger? Tiger. All right. Let's hear it for tiger. Give me another one. Wolf. All right. Now someone give me a plant. Flower. Weed. Okay, weed. We're gonna go with weed. All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's. Yeah. Anyway, okay, we're gonna go with a weed, like a growing weed. Yeah, we'll go with that. But okay, so the cool thing about this is we have a recursive component. We've created a tree out of it. But look at this. If I change something in the top level, like let's say life is a bad name, I want to call it thing. It changes everywhere. It goes down the recursive hierarchy. That's pretty cool. So I can just keep on adding. Maybe like we have a cub, but then I say, okay, animal's not right. Like maybe we want cats. I don't know. It'll change. And so we really just created a recursive tree with one element, a backing view model, and we basically have what almost amounts to like a to-do application where you could start breaking out your stuff. It's like I could easily use this. So yeah, let's take a look at a custom attribute. U0.5. Whoops, I gotta do git checkout config. All right. Now I just want to show you a custom attribute really quickly. Let's say that I wanted, when I add something, I don't think it's cool enough when it's added to the DOM. I want something that grabs a little more attention. So I'm going to create a custom attribute called jiggle. Jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. And if we look at this, jiggle attribute, on line 1, I'm going to import my animation library, import snapped from snap.js. And then on line 2, I'm going to use Aurelia's dependency injection. I'm going to import its injector, and on line 4, I'm going to use it with its decorator. So I'm going to say @inject element. And element is basically just the element that the attribute's going to be on, right? So when I inject that, I call it in my element. That task queue doesn't need to be there. Whoops. And then we say this.element equals element. So basically, we just make it available on my attribute class. And then in the attached function, this is actually a lifecycle function that Aurelia calls. And when the element is actually attached to the DOM, this is going to run this function. And so all we do is call our animation library, and we say, okay, for this element, run the animation called attention, and do some like rotation stuff. This is just animation, right? So to use this, what do? In component demo, I just have to require on line 3 from /jiggle attribute, and then all I have to do is add my jiggle component to my, I love saying jiggle, my jiggle component to recursive component, right? And then inside my recursive component, it should be in here as well, and I'm not entirely sure why it's not, but yeah. So yeah, all I have to do is add that attribute where I want to use it. And so we'll see what that behavior looks like. All right, so when I add something, let's say I add animal, right? Add again. When it's attached to the DOM, it's gonna jiggle, right? Do this again. Cat. I don't know. And then so yeah. Let's go ahead and recap here. So again, what did we see? We saw a composition of components with custom elements. We just had a simple example, but I mean, you can imagine chaining these components together to create, like bigger things, right? And compositional components allow you to mix and match components quickly and easily. You can just create them and then you can just start dropping them in, right? We saw nesting. They're compositional, so you can use a component inside of something. So again, you can build something big. I can maybe build like an Outlook inbox by building an email template or an email custom element or like a email list type thing. And I can just like compose these elements almost like Legos, just put them together. We saw component recursion. It's not something that you may often use, but it's a powerful feature. You can do it, and it's pretty cool, And so like instead of having to build a tree view, I created one component and I just reused it inside of itself. And then we saw cross-cutting concerns, handled by custom attributes. And so you can imagine, I said this before, like if you had a draggable attribute or something like our attention, you can use that anywhere. I could put that jiggle attribute on my navigation bar if I wanted to annoy everyone who used my application. If I had a draggable attribute, I could put it on any element I wanted, and then I would automatically have it draggable. So again, I can create a rich UI very quickly and easily just by using these custom elements and custom attributes to create reusable custom components that I can build upon. So okay, that's kind of was a lot of demos. So let's take a deep breath, let's recap, let's come up for air. All right, so we've talked about what Aurelia is, we've seen some background, we've seen the facts. But more importantly, we've gotten off the line, we got started with an application, we saw how that can work. We gained some momentum. And we saw how we can create custom components and start to build rich UIs just by leveraging these components and just kind of putting them together, just dropping them in, Lego style. Now, we're going to talk about maintaining that momentum. We're going to talk about not stopping. Has anyone out there run into the scenario where you're using a framework and maybe you have like 2 weeks left and you have to get this one last feature done, and you run into a situation that the framework wasn't designed for, right? And then it's a hard stop, and you're stuck, and you're basically not in a good place, right? Well, I'm gonna say right now, yeah, I can tell because I've been there, yeah. Once a week, right? Well, I'm gonna say this now, this is very important. Every framework ever will get in your way, always. It's never not going to happen. It will always get in your way. That's actually not a problem. The problem is when the framework doesn't get out of your way, right? If the framework doesn't get out of your way, that's a problem. So Aurelia's configurability, flexibility, and extensibility ensure that you control the framework, not the other way around. So let's take a look at what it can do. There's no demo for this because some of this is fairly advanced, but we're going to talk about how Aurelia inverts control and it gives it to you, the developer. So again, Aurelia is a collection of libraries. It's highly modular and it's decoupled. And what that means, again, is that you can use all of it or some of it. But the thing is that you can also swap it out if you want to. If I have a module that I don't want to use, I can swap it. It's easy to do, The modules are all interface-based. They adhere to contracts. And so because of that, again, they can be swapped. If I know what the interface is, I can swap that out. So if I want to replace the router, all I have to do is know what the router interface is, and that's actually in the code. We have an interface file. If I want to replace the logger because I don't like what it's doing, I can replace it. Say, okay, I'm going to write my new logger. I'm going to find a third-party logger that adheres to this interface. Aurelia also provides a plugin system. So if I want to use a set of features that isn't inherent to Aurelia, I can create a plugin for it, or I can find the plugin for it. In my job, we have to use Kendo, right? And sorry, but we have to use Kendo, and getting that to work with Aurelia is not easy, but someone's actually already done the work. They created a plugin for it, so all I have to do is, in my configuration, I say aurelia.use.plugin Kendo, and boom, I get all my resources, I get everything that I want. So, that's amazing for me. It's amazing because I thought that I'd have a hard stop thinking, oh man, that's not gonna work, but someone solved my problem already, which is great, and I can use their plugin and just drop it in. It's wonderful, it's absolutely wonderful. Aurelia supports multiple languages and transpilers. So I'm a fan of ES6. I'm not really a fan of TypeScript. I understand, what it does and why it does it, but I don't use Visual Studio as an IDE for my development. So I like ES6 because I don't need TypeScript. But if you like TypeScript, you can use it. if you're not familiar with ES6 or TypeScript and you really just like ES5, like you don't like the class stuff, you want to use objects and prototype functions and all of that, you can do that too. Aurelia allows it. As long as it's based in JavaScript, you're good. No problem. And finally, it runs on multiple platforms. It'll run in a browser. We have actually pretty good browser support, but it's also designed for mobile too. It's performant, so it'll work on mobile and it'll work in Electron. So you can use your Aurelia skills anywhere. So if you decide to pick up this framework and you think, oh man, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to run this, just give it a shot. You might be surprised at what you can do with it. All right, so let's bring it around. Let's come full circle. We talked about a 4-part agenda, right? We talked about what Aurelia is. We talked about getting off the line, getting started. We talked about gaining momentum, creating some custom components, and then we talked about not stopping. That was our 4-part agenda for today, and we've gotten through it. But we also originally talked about speed, right? We defined it in 3 parts. We talked about getting started. We talked about gaining momentum. We talked about not stopping. And so with these 3, the what is Aurelia, we went through that. We saw what it was. But we got off the line quickly. We saw that we could get started and kind of create a, admittedly simple application, but we saw how we can get it done. And then we checked out Aurelia's custom components and we moved forward. We saw how maybe we can become proficient with our tool to create rich UIs and do really cool stuff and do it easily. Like as a designer, maybe someone could just like start dropping in custom elements without even knowing how to code, right? But then we saw what it means to keep that speed. We talked about not stopping. So Aurelia's flexibility and extensibility is designed to give you control so that, if you run into a situation, it'll never get out of your way. I want to say that. So basically, Aurelia as a tool has really helped me to accelerate my application development. And so if you like what you see, I would encourage you to check us out. We've got some resources. We have a great documentation hub that's come quite a way. We have one of the largest Gitter chats, and it's always active and it's always great. We are on Stack Overflow, so check us out. There's a tag I think there, and Ashley Grant, he's the community lead. He's actually really good about answering those questions.
I answer a lot.
Yeah. He's good. He's good. And then, if you just want to look at the source code, it's on GitHub. And actually, if you want to contribute, we love contributors. Just come in, check it out, see what you want to do. This has been a great framework for me. So again, if you like what you see or if you have any questions, my name is Jedd Ahyoung. My website is www.jeddahyung.com. It's got a picture of me that's a little outdated. I've got dreads, but same face, same lovable, same face. I'm on GitHub, check me out. Actually, the demo for this Code on the Beach is on GitHub as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Jedd, that should be a Jedd_Ahyoung. Whoops, that's wrong. And my blog is at blog.jeddahyung.com. It's on my website. So yeah, we've got, I think, got a couple minutes for questions, like 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions for me? I guess we have like 7 minutes for questions.
So like a complex application where you have a lot more files. I was kind of concerned about like having to have the files all together.
Yeah, and that's a logical concern because, like when I first used Aurelia, I had the same thing. So we talked about the fact that Aurelia uses conventions, right? But all of its conventions are actually overridable. So if you don't want to do the view and view model pair next to each other in one directory, you don't have to. You can split out your views and view model. Like I used to use Angular. So, you can split out your views and view models in that way. You can have a folder. And I forgot to do this. I'm going to repeat the question for the camera. The question was, you saw the views and view models in the same folder. Basically, is that something that you can override? And the answer is yes. Yeah. Any other questions? We got time.
That was actually my question. If you could override that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That was the one thing that jumped out at me.
Yeah. No, I can completely understand that.
The nice thing with Aurelia is we have the conventions. They're in place, but it's very, very easy to override them. Like for example, creating a custom attribute. By convention, your class name determines the name of the custom attribute or the custom element. So you have
Right.
like
And we saw that,
custom
yeah.
attribute. Okay. But if you want to override that, or you want to be explicit on that, there's a decorator, and you just say, you bring in the decorator, the custom attribute decorator, and then pass a string to it. And the framework's like, yeah, sure. Whatever you pass in, that's what we're going to call the custom attribute. And it's a lot of stuff like that. When it comes to like overriding the conventions on where views and view models match up, that does get a little bit more difficult, because you have to teach the framework how to go find the file that you want. But it's one of those things, you learn it once, and you do it once in your application, and you're good to go. So
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, essentially, again, any convention that Aurelia has, you can override, and it's really nice in that regard. And we really try to give you that control. So, you know, if you run into a hard stop and you think it's a hard stop, if you're using our framework, you know, come into our chat room, because there's probably a way to get around what you're doing. If there is really a point where you run into a problem that you just can't surmount, then, you know, let us know, because we'd love to figure that out. Yeah. So are there any other questions?
I'd like to see that integration with Kendo.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's okay.
I was in Sydney last week, in NBC Sydney, and
Let's do this.
I went up to, it's called Progress now, who owns Kendo, and I went up to them, to their, his name is John Marstow. It's like their community guy. And I said, listen, our community keeps asking for an officially supported Kendo UI bridge for Aurelia.
Right.
And he's like, well, you know, we don't hear about it. And I go, that's because the community's already built it.
Right.
We just want you to take it over. And I showed it to him. I pulled it up, and he's just on my phone looking through it. And he's like, this thing is amazing. So the Kendo UI bridge, like you said, community developed. It's probably very soon going to become an official product.
Yeah.
For them.
There's a website that I've actually got up here now. It's not on my slides, but it's called builtwithaurelia.com. If you're interested in some stuff that you know, people have built in the community, you know, you can check this out. And actually, the Aurelia Kendo UI bridge, I think, is on here. It's yeah, it's right here. Yeah, so the Kendo UI bridge. So there's a materialized bridge. There's a leaflet plugin. People are starting to build with this. So, you know, it's beginning to have its own ecosystem. So builtwithaurelia.com.
It's only a week old.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like-
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
There's
Yeah.
the middle of last week, Dwayne Charrington started creating this, built it in about a day, posted it up on up here, put it
Yeah.
on our Getter channel, and people just started posting out. So they're building.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we've got another speaker coming in, so thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.